Hello and welcome back or welcome to the channel. I'm Loudguns, and last patch illegal salvage missions were the pinnacle of aUEC earning in Star Citizen. With some updates made in 3.21.1, these missions took a big old nerf to their cargo contents and it looked like it was time to hang my drug running boots up and retire. But just when I thought I was out, they came and dragged me back in. Because while the cargo of illegal salvage has been nerfed into oblivion, the cargo found elsewhere still has the potential to generate huge returns if you're willing to take the risk. So if this sounds good to you, grab a cup of tea while I roll the intro, then let's get into it. So let's cut to the chase. Cargo from illegal salvage missions is dead. Once in a blue moon, you can stumble across something worth enough to justify the 30k buy-in, but if you're not going to scrape the hull, you're going to be in the red on most contracts, as it probably should be. However, the variety of ships included within higher level bounties has been massively increased, and with it we find plenty with cargo holds that have a chance to be filled to the brim with goodies, both legal and more commonly not so legal. This is brilliant for a couple of reasons. First, you're getting paid credits and rep for completing the mission to kill your bounty target, so whether there's additional cargo or not, you're going to be in the black as far as profits are concerned on most runs. So if you hit a bad streak in a session without much to show for your efforts, it's going to still be profitable, whereas with the old salvage missions, you could easily sink money in without finding anything good. Secondly, there's more skill and risk involved, since you're going to have to take out the bad guys rather than rocking up to their unattended vessels. In order to get this to work, you will need to rank up your rep with the Bounty Hunters Guild, and take the appropriate certificates to get access to higher level targets. I've seen some cargo carrying ships spawn from the HRTs, the 4th level of the profession, but have by far had the most success with VHRTs and ERTs, levels 5 and 6 respectively. With this in mind, I think it makes the most sense to first prioritise the reputation grind, and then the cargo. So personally, I levelled my bounty rep up with my Ares Inferno, which made short work of targets, and I used the old rep grind method of zipping in, executing just the bounty target, then getting out of dodge before their backup could do any damage to me. But once you've got some of the higher targets unlocked, like this ERT, you're going to want to accept that contract. Now, as a rule of thumb, I would prioritise targets that are described as in the asteroids of Yella, within the Crusader system, or at weapons testing sites when round Hurston. These are space-based and it will make getting cargo out of your down target far easier than on the ground. Bounties in atmosphere still have exactly the same chance to spawn with cargo, but there's a far higher chance that they hard death when they hit the ground, costing you some of the boxes. And as we'll see a bit later in this video, they can land pretty awkwardly, making it hard to access the cargo on board and get it out of the ship. When it comes to which ship you'll want to use for this, there are a few ways to approach it. You need two things to make it work: the firepower to take on the bounty and his buddies, and the cargo capacity to take any goods you find on board. You can opt for the all-in-one approach like I'm going to in most of the vid, using a ship with both guns and SCU space, or you could work with friends, with some people bringing dedicated combat ships while others bring dedicated cargo ships. Just keep in mind that you'll get all sorts of sizes of boxes, including the 32 SCU Longboys. So while it's possible to bring any cargo ship, you might lose some cargo if you don't have something big enough to take the largest crates. So I'm going to be using my Hercs. Up first for solo, I'm getting out my C2 variant, but we'll also look at the M2 a bit later. For a cargo ship, the C2 has a decent amount of pilot-controlled weaponry, with 2 size 5 hardpoints. And outside of the missed Hull C, it's the biggest cargo grid. I'm not saying don't use the Hull C, we enjoyed having some fun with that for our Star Citizen Vice video last patch, but keep in mind that you'll need to transfer the cargo to another ship to sell since all of the selling locations are on moons or planets. Weaponry is again a personal choice, but having experimented with a few options, I prefer to go ballistic. On my Hercs, I've switched the gimbaled size 4 laser cannons to fixed AD5B ballistic Gatlings. I've added the size 4 versions, AD4Bs, to the turrets. Here I'm ostensibly trading sustain. My ballistics have limited ammo versus the infinite ammo on lasers, for a much quicker time to kill thanks to the shield penetration that ballistic weapons benefit from. A lot of the ships you'll be fighting, Hercs, Hammerheads, Redeemers, Starfarers, Reclaimers, etc., have massive shielding, but relatively small hull HP compared to it. Circumventing the shields therefore gets the target dead a lot quicker. I'd even argue that you're not actually losing out too much in terms of sustain, since if they die quicker, you run less risk of taking damage that you'll need to repair, particularly if, like me, you're choosing to fly a ship that represents a big old target. If you haven't quite got something like a Hercules, then ships like the Connie, the Corsair, even the new C1 can definitely do this, and they can all fit some of the 32 SCU cargo containers. Just before you leave the station, just make sure you got a few basics. You're going to definitely want a set of armor, certainly a helmet because you're going to be going into EVA a lot of the time. I would bring a gun because some of the cell sites are quite dangerous, and you're absolutely going to need a tractor beam. You can either use the handheld multi-tool version, or if you swing by one of the refineries you can pick up the new max lift tractor beam. I've got absolutely nothing scientific to back this up, but they definitely feel more powerful when moving the larger boxes than the smaller multi-tool version. Although that said, they are quite a bit pricier. But once you're all set up, it's time to head out and take out some bad guys. Always make sure to still start with the main target bounty. This way, just in case something goes wrong, you can always preserve your reputation at least. But after they're down, just work your way through the rest. Keep in mind that the objective here is to soft death, not hard death the target. So you're going to want to exhibit some trigger discipline. Because your shots will take some time to reach the target, you want to minimize the amount of bullets that are in the air or the vacuum at the point when your target reaches a soft death state. Fire in bursts and keep your eye on the hull status of your target, and shorten these bursts as it goes into the red. It's not the end of the world if one hard deaths, but you will lose the marker for it, and any cargo you could have got will be reduced. Once all the bad guys are down, you can go ahead and check for the cargo. The scanning mode does work, but can be a wee bit temperamental. You can access scanning mode on V, then point at your target from fairly close up, a few hundred meters or so, and hold down left mouse button. The cargo is the last part of the read which will fill in over on the right hand side, so if you don't get a full read, just try again. It sometimes takes a few goes this way, and to be fair, if it's a potentially big cargo hauler like a Hercules, I tend to go out and take a manual look anyway, just in case that scan hasn't completed properly. Just like with illegal salvage, position yourself as close as you can. Within 100 meters is good, with your cargo hold facing the derelict's cargo hold. There are a lot of ships to work your way around, so you'll just find out as you go exactly where the cargo hold on each one is. Then you just EVA across to the target, crack it open, and take a look at what's inside. Then make sure that your tractor beam is in detaching mode. By default, use B to switch back and forth between the different modes, and start grabbing boxes to move across to your ship. There's no hard and fast rule of what cargo is worth taking. All of it's worth money, but my lower floor is around the 7.5k per SCU of RMC. It's not that you can't sell things like distilled spirits, it's more a case of min-maxing and making sure that your cargo hold doesn't get filled up with low value cargo, not leaving room for the good stuff. Part of the reason I'm not really willing to put a definitive value on expected earnings for this loop is because it's so variable. There's a lot of RNG on the go, and the big payouts really come down to two of the commodities. Maize and gasping weevil eggs, which sell for around 90k per SCU and 110k per SCU respectively. If you come across these, prioritise them, even if it means throwing other cargo off your ship to fit them in. Just to put some of this into perspective, I was doing this with a couple of groups on Discord the other night. There's a link in the description down below if you'd like to get involved with some multi-crew. And one of the teams managed to make a few million in a couple of hours, while the other team made 15. So it really comes down to what you find in those holds. There is really good news from a stacking perspective though. While the patch might have nerfed the illegal salvage missions, the selling bug has been fixed. So you don't have to worry about how you stack the goods. Just try to be as efficient as possible, stacking stuff towards the back first and cramming as much in as you can. So as I alluded to earlier, I tend to prioritise space bounties because the cargo is far easier to access and move. That's not to say that you can't have success on the ground, it just might lead to some frustration with inaccessible ships. One key way to ease some of the pain here is to work with other people. When flying with others, I actually prefer the M2 over the C2 because the nose turret is in a much better position for the gunner and the pilot to fire on the same target. Having more guns manned also makes your ammo go a lot further, and I tend to find that as a team of 2 to 3 in the M2, we can sustain through about 4 or 5 missions, whereas on my own in the C2 I tend to need to reload every 2. But having a buddy can make it a lot easier to perform drop-offs onto the wrecks, regardless of how they landed. Working with mates can also help a lot with the loading and unloading, even when you're not in Atmo. When it comes to wreck diving, one of you can handle pulling up next to a ship and scanning it, and the other can make the dive and check the cargo to speed things up a fair bit. Personally, I've found it easier to stick in one ship for this reason. You could also experiment a bit with using fighters and having the cargo ship trawl behind you for the boxes. I just personally worry sometimes that this can get a bit boring for the cargo pilot, particularly if you just strike out on the loot and they end up floating around a lot without much to do. Having a crew with you is also preferable for the final stage though, heading to sell up. Again, when exactly to go and sell is down to you. It's all about working out the rough value of the goods that you have on board and what you're willing to risk in one more mission. If you've got some particularly high value loot, you don't have to fill your cargo hold. You can just go and cash in whenever you like. So you will have to work out whether you've packed contraband or legal goods. If in doubt, check out a website like SC Trade Tools to see if an item is vice or not. That said, with the exception of RMC, the only valuable goods that I've personally found so far have been contraband, so chances are you're going to have some of that on board. Legal goods can be sold at any TDD at a major landing zone, but any illegal cargo will need to go to one of the NQA terminals. There are options at Grimhex, Crew L4 and Crew L5, but they don't buy all of the types of narcotics and their inventories are really quite limited, so you're probably going to be standing staring at a console for a long time. My preferred run is to the scrapyards. You've got one of these within each system. Brio's Breaker Yard on Daymar, Waste and Disposal Orient von Hurston, Samson and Sons on Walla, and Devlin's Scrap and Salvage on Euterpe. These are all non-armistice, so you'll need to be on the lookout for pirates and just opportunistic thieves. Always make sure you're carrying, and at this point calling in a mate for backup is not a bad shout even if you weren't already working together. Of course, if anything looks awry, just turn tail and run. Try another scrapyard or server hop. Keep in mind that the easiest is not always the best. Bounties spawn all over Stanton, so it's not as limited as illegal salvage was, but space bounties only spawn in Crusader and Hurston, and for this reason I tend to avoid the scrapyards there. I'm much more likely to be making trips out to ArtCorp or to Microtech. This is the riskiest part of the run, so it does pay to be cautious. And if at this point you're packing millions of credits worth of cargo, there's really not an excuse to not to upgrade your QT drive and make the trip further out. As a not so little bonus tip, if you happen to be doing this loop at the same time as the Jump Town mission is up, you'll see that one in the priority on your contract manager, then you can opt to sell your maze to the authorities for a markup of the normal price. Don't forget that the JT mission doesn't cover you for anything but your maze, so if you've got other contraband on board, it could be a risk trying to land at the drop-off station. Then again, it's also a risk landing at a scrapyard with a bunch of maze on board that you don't intend to sell ASAP. It's kind of a pick your poison situation, I guess. So hopefully this little guide will help you keep filling your wallets. If it helped you out, then feel free to drop a like and hit subscribe for a bit more content. Just as I said in the last video on the 30k salvage missions, I would fully expect this to be rebalanced. Don't get me wrong, I think there should be an element of this gameplay, and I think it does make sense that higher risk bounty targets would be hauling contraband, and therefore create a loop that mixes combat and more logistical gameplay. I really love any type of situation in the game that lets you find synergies between players who are after a different experience from Star Citizen. But realistically, I don't think any loop, unless it's something that requires you to gather a very large group of people and therefore share a payout, should offer payouts into the tens of millions. Clearly some of these loot tables need a bit of rebalancing, and that will obviously come in time. My advice is to enjoy it while it lasts, buy yourself some crazy new ships to try out, but don't get used to this kind of earning potential as the norm. But with all that said, I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching all the way to the end, and I look forward to seeing you next time.